Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, it's 420, the unofficial international day of celebration of cannabis. We've got an exclusive with the DC dispensary owner trying to make it an official national holiday.
So, there's National Hemp Day, there's National CBD Day, there's National Ice Cream Day, there's National Dog. There's a lot of national days. There is no National 420 Day.
Plus, thanks to Grow House Media in Austin, Texas, an inside look at the unconstitutional raid in Texas on a licensed hemp store.
We were sent to jail over a legal plant sold all over Texas, but we were operating legally.
They took everything.
And Kentucky Senator Rand Paul introduces a bill that would allow states to opt out of the federal hemp ban on the books for November of this year.
But it's difficult for those in the hemp business right now because it's a crop. It has to be planted. And if it's going to be made illegal in November, farmers are wondering whether they should plant it this year.
And the first adult-use dispensary in Boston, Pure Oasis, closes for owing more money than they're bringing in, a fate many operators in the Bay State and around the world face. And speaking of Boston, the 14th Annual New England Cannabis Convention opens its two-day trade show on Friday and Saturday.
A third of the country isn't going to legalize over a 4-year period, driving hundreds and thousands of new businesses and hundreds of thousands of new attendees. So that contraction to me is natural.
All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCMTV's weekly roundup on the fight to end cannabis prohibition. I'm Alaina Pinto. Well, it's April 20th, also known as 420, the unofficial celebration of cannabis here in the United States and around the world. And over the past decade of adult use legalization of cannabis, this day always registers sales records as dispensaries use the day for specials and bargains. Last week, we shared the origin of the holiday, traced back to a group of friends at San Rafael High School in California. Now there is a woman in Washington, D.C. named Grace Hyde, who runs a dispensary in Washington, D.C. called The District, who is leading an initiative to make April 20th an official national holiday. Here's our executive producer, Jimmy Young, talking with Grace Hyde about the beginning of this effort.
Can you explain to me what that's all about?
Sure. So, there's National Hemp Day, there's National CBD Day, there's National Ice Cream Day, there's National Dog. There's a lot of national days. There is no National 420 Day. We just feel like the plant deserves recognition, creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's immensely helpful to people, integrated into their lifestyle in acute settings. It helps so many people, millions of people across the country, and it doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. So we decided to try and shed a little bit of light on that and see if we could get enough signatures to try and turn this into something.
Again, signatures. What is the actual process for this? We'll get into signature gathering. Yes, go ahead.
So we have a change.org. You can find it on our website, districtcannabis.us/420. It's very easy.
And I'm going to put it on the screen so it'd be even easier for people. Okay.
Excellent. And then if you do live close to the DMV, we are running a promotion as well in Maryland, where if you sign the petition, you can get a promotional penny pre-roll at any participating dispensaries.
There you go. A penny pre-roll. I love that. Absolutely.
Let's celebrate 420.
We will release the rest of that interview this week as a special report on Thursday. Now, while we recognize that federal reform is more newsworthy than a special day for the industry, it is also a sign of normalization. So if and when rescheduling or even descheduling of the plant ever happens, the official recognition could come sooner than later. But with Cannabis Standard Time, it's tough to predict. Another thing that is tough to predict are unannounced raids on licensed hemp stores who continue to operate legally, knowing that a federal ban on THC-infused hemp is already on the books for November this year. Law enforcement is obviously confused with the changes, since there is another new federal definition of hemp with just 0.4 milligrams of THC in a package. Still, it is shocking to see what happened at a Texas dispensary in Austin in March. An unprovoked invasion of a hemp store called Terp House was captured on surveillance video. We get that story this week from our friends in Austin, Texas, Grow House Media.
were sent to jail over a legal plant sold all over Texas. But we were operating legally.
They took everything.
So Tour Press got raided on Friday the 13th of March.
We were conducting business as usual. It's about 6:30 in the evening.
I was in the office working on some designs. Then that's when I saw on the camera that they're all lining up along the windows.
At least 4 officers coming along our window here with their guns. And I was like, oh, shoot.
And it was just unexpected.
They started hitting the door, yelling, open the door. I said, it's open. They're like, open the door. I was like, it's open. They can't hear anything because they're boom, boom, open the door. I told them turn the handle, but they still didn't hear me. They eventually pried the door open, even though it was unlocked.
They came in guns drawn like we were criminals.
I immediately got down on the ground because I didn't want to get shot. You know, they handcuffed us and took us outside.
I got on the ground. They were asking if we had guns.
I had one of my employees here and I had a customer here. He was definitely very scared. He kept telling them, you know, I'm a customer, I'm a customer. They, you know, handcuffed him. They took him outside.
When the raid happened, I was at home on the couch with my kids. You know, I just sat there waiting to see if they were gonna come arrest me.
DPS had the arrest warrant. At least 4 officers. I know that Travis County, possibly an APD, they said that they were here to support, not for the arrest itself. Privately, they told me that these guys have a hard-on for our industry.
This is our hemp retail license, consumable hemp product. It was issued on 9/17. They tried to say we didn't have a license. Day of the raid, we had this paper ready for anybody to see. They didn't even ask to see it.
I was arrested and booked into Travis County Jail. I was there for about 48 hours. So for about 2 days, I was in a holding cell and I didn't know what was going on.
They put us in jail for 2 days for what? No reason. What they put us through was just horrible, you know?
It was hell. We're definitely gonna fight this. We're not gonna take this line down.
We want to thank Liz Grow and Patrick Pope from the Grow House Media Group out of Austin for providing us with that story. It also shows us how this plant continues to cause the erosion of democracy and due process across the United States. We will continue to follow further developments to this story as the lawsuit plays out. That raid happened in mid-March in Texas, but in the past week, a Texas judge issued a temporary restraining order that paused the Lone Star State's enactment of their own ban of THC-infused products. That order will remain in effect for 2 weeks while the two sides continue to figure out fair regulations that will allow the industry to survive. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C. this week, somebody was actually working since the government is still not officially open for business. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul introduced a bipartisan bill that would allow states to opt out of the federal ban of the hemp-derived products while regulating their own hemp markets. Senator Paul introduced the new Hemp Safety Enforcement Act that would allow states and Native American tribes the opportunity to create their own regulations that would allow the industry to survive. Senator Rand Paul shared his thoughts on states' rights on regulating hemp, like his state of Kentucky and how they are doing.
Kentucky has a successful hemp industry. There are new startup companies now that have expanded to the tune of millions of dollars, and it's been good for Kentucky. It's good for Kentucky farmers. It's a cash crop, kind of like tobacco, not as big as tobacco, but kind of like tobacco as a cash crop, and I think we ought to expand it. The Kentucky legislature looked at this, and is there a potential for abusing it? Yeah, like anything else, you can take too much of things or you can abuse it, just like alcohol. So what Kentucky State Legislature decided to do was to regulate it somewhat like alcohol. So if you want a drink that has hemp-derived THC in it, you go to a liquor store. And you have to be of age. You have to be 21. They police it, and there's punishment to any stores selling it that aren't. So they've gotten rid of the bad stuff that's too potent. They've gotten rid of stuff that isn't tested for purity, and they actually have rules on this. This is a big advantage over what we have. But then the federal government came back last year and passed legislation to ban hemp completely. And I think this is a disaster. So I've been working across the aisle with Amy Klobuchar, who's a senator from Minnesota, and we have a bill that I think is going to be introduced this week. She's on the agricultural committee, and they do the farm bill. Our hope is that she can get a vote in committee to try to attach this to the farm bill. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, but it's difficult for those in the hemp business right now because it's a crop. It has to be planted, and if it's going to be made illegal in November, farmers are wondering whether they should plant it this year, and they probably already had to make this decision. And I lament that government's, trying to destroy this industry now, but I'm doing everything I can and working across the aisle with a Democrat senator to try to say that if your state has decided to regulate hemp, then the state law would supersede the federal law, which is kind of really the way it ought to be.
In the meantime, other states are trying to move forward, but nothing is easy or fast with cannabis reform. Even in Virginia, where that state's legislature passed an adult use law for that already existing medical market. That law was handed to their pro-cannabis new governor, Abigail Spanberger. All she had to do was sign it, and the market could have opened this year. But instead, she decided to return that bill to her state house for amendments and delay the introduction of their adult use laws. And now that anticipated launch has moved to next year. Here's our man in Virginia, Joe Parsons, with an update on that.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I want to start this week off by wishing all of our viewers a happy and safe 420 week. From the WPCMTV family to all of yours, please consume responsibly and be safe out there. There is cause to celebrate for the holiday this week, as Governor Spanberger has made progress on positive cannabis reform for the Commonwealth. She signed into law the Cannabis Parental Rights Bill. House Bill 942 is now the law of the land, and simple cannabis possession and use will no longer be used as grounds to either lose visitation or custody rights. This is a big win for Virginia. Speaking from personal experience, this has affected so many families in the Commonwealth. Unfortunately, I don't have all positive news to report this week. The governor is requiring amendments to be made to two other major cannabis bills before she will agree to sign them. Starting with the resentencing bills, SB 62 and HB 26, she is requesting a change of rules for the cannabis delivery system to approve these bills. This will further prolong the deadline of April 15th, pushing the date now past April 22nd when the legislature reconvenes. The adult use retail bill has also been put on hold until further amendments are made. The governor's office did release a statement with Spanberger's reasoning for the delay. Quote, the move will allow for additional time to implement a legal market safely and curb the illicit market. End quote. Spanberger further added, quote, we need to rein in on these shady businesses and make sure the legal marijuana market does not make the problems worse. End quote. This was directed towards the illegal vape shops that continue to sell illegal and untested products in the state. The amendments that she is proposing are to lower the daily purchase limit from 2.5 ounces to 2 ounces, and increase of the tax from 6% to 8% by fiscal year 2029, lowering the amount of licenses from 350, that was the initial proposal, to now only 200. And the biggest problem being moving the launch date from January 2027, as was expected, to now July 2027. These amendments have risen concern from the cannabis industry and reform groups alike. J.M. Padini from the Virginia Normal is criticizing the governor's delay and made a statement this week saying, quote, further delaying retail sales is just another page from the prohibitionist playbook, the kind of policy failure we saw under Glenn Youngkin, and not what we'd expect from Abigail Spanberger, end quote. Adding that the delay will also make the illicit market flourish. It endangers the community and, most importantly, doesn't keep marijuana out of the hands of youths. Chelsea Higgs-Wise from Marijuana Justice has also said the bill should be signed into law without the amendments and work to structure the bills once they are law. There's much confusion of whether lawmakers will bend to enact her signature or not, but hopefully a compromise will be made to finally get this past the finish line. Well, happy 420 week, everyone. From Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and as always, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
In Tennessee, the state government there continues to discuss how to regulate hemp products. At the same time, lawmakers are talking about ways to reschedule cannabis on their own. Tennessee is one of 8 states in the United States that does not have any medical program. And one thing that state does understand is their rights to control and regulate substances themselves, no matter what the federal law says. Well, now let's check in with Tina Tasaka with her Southwest Cannabis Report for the week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation in Cannabis America, and this is the Southwest Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona is moving to eliminate cannabis deserts in rural parts of the state. Under SB 1057, the Department of Health Services is preparing to issue 18 new licenses for small towns located at least 25 miles from any existing dispensary. Known as the Rural Opportunity Initiative, the plan aims to bring safe, regulated access to underserved communities by this October, while providing new economic sparks for Arizona's smaller mountain and desert towns. In Nevada, the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board convened on April 16th for its monthly administrative session to streamline licensing and manage ongoing market transitions. The board kept the industry moving by approving critical extensions for several major projects. The Cure Company, Caliente Development, and the Limo Joint now have until December 1st to finalize their inspections. In a win for social equity, Meds and Sin was granted an extension for their consumption lounge through April 2027. On the business front, the board greenlit ownership transfers for Solus Holdings and the sale of Libra Wellness Center's cultivation licenses, signaling continued market consolidation across the state. The clock is ticking for Nevada regulators. Mandated by the state legislature and the governor's office under AB 203, the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board and Nevada Gaming Control Board have officially launched a joint study due this December. They're tackling the controversial 1,500-foot ban that keeps dispensaries off the Las Vegas Strip, a restriction deeply tied to casino operations and long-standing gaming rules. The goal, reclaim millions in lost tax revenue now flowing to the illegal market while exploring how cannabis and casino tourism can safely coexist. For the first time, state leadership is forcing both industries, gaming and cannabis, to the same table, potentially reshaping the Las Vegas experience into one where regulated cannabis, resort corridors, and entertainment-driven casinos are no longer at odds, but part of a unified, revenue-generating ecosystem. That's it for the Southwest Highlights. I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation in Cannabis America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The closure of dispensaries continues in many states, and in Massachusetts this week, Pure Oasis, the first dispensary to open in Boston, had to cease operations. Their money was frozen after they were not able to pay their outstanding debt, a story that is happening far too often in many states. Here's Curtis Emery on that story and more in his Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week's big story, Pure Oasis, the Boston-based dispensary, has been forced to close its doors after the Department of Revenue froze its assets over $300,000 in back taxes owed. Pure Oasis had applied for a social equity grant and was awarded that social equity grant for the same amount, $300,000, in December, and that disbursement was planned to have started soon. However, with its bank accounts frozen, Pure Oasis is unable to pay its employees or pay for any services and has therefore been forced to close its doors until some sort of resolution can be reached. However, the owner has said that he is filing unemployment claims for his employees, many of which have been forced to take second jobs as the average disposable income on consumers has dropped and the average price of cannabis products has dropped across the state. The CCC is hoping to fix that. The next story here, June 16th, the CCC has announced it will start its cultivation license freeze, a 4-month freeze here in the state, which hopes to alleviate some of the pressure on dispensaries across the Commonwealth. There's an oversupply of cannabis in the state, and as more cultivation licenses are given out there, that surplus grows larger and larger, continually driving the price of cannabis down. It's unfortunate, and it's hurting a lot of small businesses here. And with the overhaul bill on the governor's desk, which seems to give the edge to multi-state operators, allowing the license cap to raise from 3 to 6. Hopefully, this cultivation freeze will allow some small businesses to catch up a little bit. It's unfortunate that so many small cannabis businesses here in the state are feeling so much pressure over the loss of revenue here. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Ohio this week, a judge stepped in and blocked the legislature's attempt to ban THC-infused beverages derived from hemp. In Franklin County, Judge Jeffrey Brown issued a temporary restraining order to block that state's legislative initiative to ban THC hemp products. Senate Bill 56 is the target here that went into effect a month ago on March 20th. This restraining order allows the sales of these products until they are sold out. With more from Ohio, here's Christina Brisson.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So the big news here, as you all know, is SB 56. It all went into effect and businesses have been closing. It's made a major impact on things overall, I feel like, in the industry. However, there is maybe a little light at the end of the tunnel. A Sandusky judge has imposed a stop on the Ohio hemp ban right now. So, and the question here is this legal commercially speaking? Because regardless of anything else, it's kind of like, when they have the stuff with utilities and you can't have more than one as a whole, one's running the entire city. That's kind of the same thing. So what the judge is trying to say is this is a situation where you're forcing people to buy from certain stores that are licensed here and this and that, only in the state of Ohio. So it's actually maybe something that is going to be a sales legal issue. And if they can get that put in a class action, that could go across all the counties in Ohio. So let's kind of hope that happens. That'll unfold more as it comes, and I'll keep you posted. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Update with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the oldest brands in cannabis media is High Times. The magazine was first published in 1974, and our executive producer, Jimmy Young, used to buy it for the articles and, of course, the micro images of flower buds. Now, in its latest rebirth under Josh Kesselman, High Times is going local, and our Michigan contributor, Amy Carter, is right in the middle of it in her state.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's roll it up. I recently attended a High Times meet and greet hosted by Michigan Normal in Detroit, and this one, it felt different. High Times is getting back to the grassroots of cannabis through their local editions. These are going to be freely distributed in local markets. These new local events are all about community, bridging the gap between legacy operators and the legal market, while creating safe, licensed spaces that helps destigmatize cannabis. And here's the fire part. They're launching a High Times local magazine right here in Detroit in May. So if you're a cannabis business looking to advertise, tap in. If you're in the Detroit area, keep your eyes out for that drop. Now let's talk about edibles, because this one is kind of wild. Gelato Canna just teamed up with Fat and Weird Cookies in what they're calling a first-of-its-kind collab. We're talking oversized gourmet cookies, infused and reimagined for the cannabis space. Each one comes at 200 milligrams of THC, designed for sharing or, knowing your limits. They'll be hitting the licensed dispensaries across Michigan for around $15, so expect these to fly off the shelf. And finally, let's get into a little bit of politics. Chris Swanson, a longtime sheriff, is now running for governor, and he's coming in hot with a message that cannabis industry has been waiting for. Repeal the 24% wholesale cannabis tax. Right now, that tax is on top of existing ones, has put a serious pressure on the industry. We're seeing falling sales, business closures, and people being pushed out. Swanson says we can't balance the state budget on the backs of one industry, and warns that overtaxing legal cannabis just drives people back to the illicit market. Now, on paper, that sounds great, but let's be real. There's hesitation because this industry has been there before. We've backed candidates, believed the promises, and then watched them switch up once they got into office. So while this is getting attention and even support, most people are staying cautiously optimistic. At the end of the day, we'll just have to wait and see. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block this week, but we have many more state reports coming up. Plus, we'll have a preview of this week's New England Cannabis Conference scheduled for Friday and Saturday this week in Boston at the Heinz Auditorium. Jimmy Young talked to Mark Shepard from NECANN on Cannabis Coast to Coast News after this break.
We have to acknowledge that legalization happened in Massachusetts via citizen ballot. So it's tough to be a critic of the system, but certainly the obvious deceptive tactics they use to get signatures that so many of us witnessed.
Cannabis is legal for adults ages 21 and older in Massachusetts. Dinner's ready, the vibes are right, but this is one course you don't rush. Eat and hydrate before you consume because edibles take time. Start low, go slow, and take a break before going back for more. Because the best nights aren't about how fast you feel it. The best nights are the ones you plan for.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to the B Block, our second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto, and coming up this week here in Boston is the 14th Annual New England Cannabis Convention at the Heinz Auditorium. Mark Shepard is the founder and CEO of NECANN, and this week, executive producer Jimmy Young talked to Mark about the upcoming event, and despite an industry that continues to struggle, these trade shows are a great barometer about the health of the industry. One place that continues to grow, literally and figuratively, is the grow competition called NECANN Cup.
This year, the sort of highlights that we've got going is we do have a terpene tasting experience going on in the third hall both days, run by the Ganager Guild, which should be pretty cool. We had a similar one last year. This one's going to be a little bit more diversified, and it's a great experience for people to both be educated on terpenes, but then also experience them. Another big piece has become the NECANN Cup Awards that happen on Friday. We had just under 600 entries this year, and it's just amazing when you see the width and breadth of the entries. And Mike Clinton, who runs that for us, has done just an incredible job of putting together prize packages. I think the awards he gives out are good on their own, but just the special extra, it's going to be, people really should come and see just the prizes and awards that he put together for the winners this year. It's going to be great.
When is it? What time is it Friday, the announcement? When do you have your announcement?
Friday at 1:30 is when he takes that stage, which is in the third hall. We're upstairs again this year with the three halls across, and then we're actually doing an official after party for the first time. We've typically just kind of let other people do that, but King's was available, so we rented it. So Friday from 5 to 7, we're just having an official party right outside the convention center. Just walk across the street, which is nice.
I know where King's is. Okay, I
right.
think, if I remember correctly, it was a movie theater. I got to. You know what I saw there? Woodstock.
Wow! Yeah.
I'm dating myself, of course.
Sure,
but I can. You know what I mean? I lived to tell the story. I gotten this far.
We'll have more with Mark Shepard later in the news show, but now it's time for our international reports, and we start with Dave Barton in the UK.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK and international cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the United Kingdom, Canadian producer Rubicon Organics has launched its 1964 Supply Co brand via distributor 4C Labs, another signal that international operators see the UK as a key growth market. But alongside that growth, patient protections are back in focus. In Wales, the Liberal Democrats have put forward a motion calling for stronger safeguards for medical cannabis patients, particularly around discrimination and inconsistent treatment by authorities. Over in Germany, the Federal Court of Justice has reaffirmed that medical cannabis remains classified as a pharmaceutical, meaning strict advertising bans still apply. A reminder that even as access evolves, cannabis is firmly anchored within traditional medicines regulation. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, regulators have published new oversight rules for the country's legal cannabis cultivation experiment, tightening controls on growers as the government continues its cautious, highly managed rollout. And in Spain, industry watchers are asking whether the country could become Europe's next cannabis processing hubs, thanks to its climate infrastructure and growing role in the supply chain, positioning it as the potential backbone of the continent's production economy. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK and international cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oh, and happy 420.
There's an interesting study released by the vape company PAX this week. Basically, the results of this study conclude that the safest way to ingest cannabis is to vape dry flower. According to the study, that way of titration or consumption cleans out 99% of the toxins created when flower is ignited in a joint or a pipe. Most medical doctors confirm that vaping dry flower decreases any combustion and will clean out most of the toxins when created when flower is inhaled. You can look up the rest of that yourself. Now let's check in with Doug Miller for his High on Wall Street report for this week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. SNDL Inc. is gearing up to drop its first quarter 2026 financial results on April 29th, and this could be a key moment for the stock. The company says results will be released before the market opens, followed by a live conference call and webcast where management will break down performance and outlook. Now, here's why this matters. SNDL isn't just another cannabis name. It's one of the largest vertically integrated players in Canada, with exposure not only to cannabis but liquor retail, giving it multiple revenue streams in a tough market. We'll be watching closely for signs of profitability, especially after recently showed improvements in its prior earnings. So let's take a look at the stock chart before the earnings. It's trading around $1.51, and it is setting up going into the earnings, as most cannabis stocks are looking good at the moment. So I expect some kind of catalyst to be coming out in the industry soon. So always trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
When the book on the history of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country is finally written, and that might take another decade or two, the chapter on Nebraska will be an interesting read. It also might be the most contentious and longest chapter, since that state's leadership is continuing to fight the will of the 71% of voters who wanted a medical program available. This week, the Nebraska Medical Cannabis Commission signed off on the supply chain regulations close to 1 year after issuing their first regulations. The last step, however, might be the hardest one to take. Those regulations have to be approved by the Governor, Jim Pillen, and the Attorney General, Mike Hilgers. Both have protested that this initiative even passed in the first place. Nebraska even blocked allowing the medical community from recommending access to the medicine to its citizens without penalty. So when you think your state is frustrating with their implementation of the laws and regulations, think about the battle that is going on in the Cornhusker State.
I am Kimmy Cannabis with Canna Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This weekend, I've been out in the streets, at the events, in the crowds, and more importantly, in the conversations. And let me tell you, there's a tone shift happening in Oklahoma's cannabis community. Over and over again, I'm hearing the same story. People who believed in the green rush, who invested everything they had, their savings, their time, their energy, only to feel like the system was never built for them to succeed. With the moratorium on new licenses now extended to August 1st, 2028, the message is loud and clear. The door isn't just closed, it's locked. And for many, that door slammed shut after they already stepped inside. What's even harder to ignore is the reaction. Every time another shutdown is announced, there's a sense of celebration from agencies that feel completely disconnected from the human cost. These aren't just business closings. These are people losing livelihoods, dreams, and in some cases, everything. It's heartbreaking to watch what started as a green dream for so many turn into what feels like a red state nightmare. But here's the balance. Because 420 weekend reminds us of something powerful too. The resilience, the survivors, the ones who are still standing, still creating, still pushing forward despite it all. And I'm here to celebrate you, while also holding space for those who didn't make it through. And on a brighter note, national eyes are watching. CNN was right here in Oklahoma, highlighting the fierce, unstoppable women in this cannabis space, which aired Sunday, April 19th. So yes, there's struggle, but there's also strength. And those stories deserve to be told too. That's it from Oklahoma. Peace, love, and all that good stuff. Happy 420.
There's a fascinating story emerging from Minnesota that involves the sovereignty of tribal lands and a local family farm that received a cultivation license. Since Tina Tasaka covers the tribal lands beat in addition to her Southwest States report, and Alicia Bellamy is in Minnesota, we combined their reports this week.
I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. BMO Financial Group, headquartered in Toronto, launched North America's first Indigenous labeled bond, a $200 million financing tool backing Indigenous-owned businesses and communities, partnering with Cedar Leaf Capital, Inc. The bond supports growth sectors like cannabis, where Indigenous operators are expanding. It earned Social Bond of the Year from Environmental Finance, spotlighting innovation, sustainability, and Indigenous economic empowerment. Flame and Flora officially debuted on April 11th as a premier sovereign enterprise of the Shakopee Sioux community. SMSC, located in Prior Lake, Minnesota, the dispensary sits across from the tribe's Mystic Lake Casino. The shop features a unique deli-style service where customers can select flower by scent and sight, alongside a curated menu of tribal-sourced products and wellness-focused cannabis options. That's the latest in Tribal Nations Cannabis. I'm Tina Tasaka for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and this is your Minnesota Report. I'm also on the Board of Trustees for the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. Teresa Haugen broke ground on her 11,000 square foot cannabis cultivation facility on her family's privately owned land near LaPorte. Then Leech Lake Band told her she couldn't grow there because she's not a tribal member. Teresa, among one of the first applicants to receive the preliminary pre-approval from the Office of Cannabis Management, secured a $2 million loan, broke ground the spring of 2025, her facility near completion before the tribal officials delivered the news last fall. The Cannabis Compact with the state limits cultivation licenses to tribal members only. That applies to all businesses within the reservation boundaries, regardless of who owns the land. The OCM director, Eric Tobel, acknowledged that regulators were not checking addresses during the initial review because applicants aren't required to have a physical site before applying. Teresa says she sought a title company's opinion before coordinating with the tribe directly. Her attorney says he was never asked to research potential tribal issues. The state is encouraging both sides to resolve this issue, but is largely staying out of the dispute. Haugen is now weighing a lawsuit against both the state and the tribe, or just converting her building to storage units. I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota Report.
With more from what is coming up at NECANN this week in Boston, here's Jimmy Young with Mark Shepard.
Well, you get your event coming up. It's an annual thing, but I did notice on the calendar it's in a different month this year. I don't know, is that something that you could control or not? Because we all look forward to March. You know, it's almost like a rite of. It's like the Masters, Mark. You know what I mean?
Right.
I look forward to the Masters every year because I know when it'll be. But now we're in April.
And for the real old timers of NECANN will remember that in 2016, which was our first year at the Hines, we were also in April, and I didn't know it at the time, but every 10 years, the Hines closes January, February, and March for renovations. So when we started making our future picks, they were just like, you're going to be in April in 2026. And I was like, oh, okay. So unfortunately, in my mind, it's on the tail end of 420, which we I didn't want to tag on that because I think it puts strains on marketing companies, but marketing departments. But it is what it is. That's the dates we had available, and we're making the best out of it.
And as always, it's one of the best shows, I swear, every year. And in fact, that's not just my opinion and my history at your event, which I think you know the depth of. But
yep,
it is amazing that you pull it off. And when I talk to people that go to NECANN shows, and again, unsolicited, Mark, they really have a good experience as a vendor at your shows. Those that go to the various other shows, without naming names or anything, there's quite a few of them out there, but everything gets compared to MJ Biz anyway. And even MJ Biz took a hit this year. And I wonder if that hit on the trade show floor has affected NECANN at all.
Well, observationally, obviously, anybody who's gone to MJ Biz over the years has seen the difference the last couple of years. I have a little bit different take than most people in that I think it's a natural adjustment that put it this way, there was no plan in place, so there's nothing MJ Biz could have done, in my opinion, that could prevent that show to regressing back to which was like a 700 booth show, which was what it was this year, because the industry doesn't support that. And if you look back, a third of the country legalized over a 5-year period. And that was the year when, everybody at MJ Biz and everybody in the event industry, we all thought we were brilliant because every event we did magically just succeeded. We were all brilliant for that 5 years. Well, that's not going to happen again. A third of the country isn't going to legalize over a 4-year period, driving hundreds and thousands of new businesses and hundreds of thousands of new attendees. So that contraction to me is natural. And it was funny to me, as someone who does the second biggest show in the country in Boston that peaked at about 300 booths, to hear everybody just comment that, wow, what a waste, MJ Biz was nothing. Well, it was 700 booths. It's double the size of any other show I've ever done. So it kind of made me feel bad when people go, oh, it was nothing. I'm like, oh, okay. So they're sort of a victim of the success they had when they were 1,300 booths, but that's never going to happen again. And there's nothing they can do. They made some mistakes in trying to get there and renting enough space to fit 1,300 booths. That made it look terrible. If you had an appropriate size space for 700 booths, it looks pretty good. So I think we'll see the same thing in Boston, right? Like we're in the Northeast. Sort of NECANN Boston has become the annual meeting of the industry on the East Coast, but I just don't think that's going to grow every year. And in my mind, that Boston show, it's how long can we continue to serve as that annual meeting, and then will be a reflection of how big the industry is in the Northeast. And if it contracts, our show will contract. If it grows, our show will grow.
There's also that initiative, that ballot initiative by the prohibitionist group SAM in our state of Massachusetts. I'd love to get your feedback about that, about the tactics that they use to collect signatures, and why they're doing what they're doing. But more importantly, Mark, there is a trend in our country to usurp the power of the citizen ballot initiative, and that goes to the soul of democracy, and it does concern me. And I'm gonna guess you feel the same kind of thing.
I mean, it's terrible to see. I mean, I will say, ironically, we have to acknowledge that legalization happened in Massachusetts via citizen ballot. So it's tough to be a critic of the system. But certainly the obvious deceptive tactics they use to get signatures that so many of us witnessed as you went up and you saw the signature gatherers at certain place, and they mischaracterized what the ballot was. Disappointing that wasn't acknowledged and forced them to redo the signatures, but it is what it is. And our job now as an industry is to educate everyone, make them understand that this is going to happen if we don't vote. And if we do all become active and do vote, we'll easily defeat it. But it'll be one of the major messages at NECANN Boston next week. We have 3 different sessions talking about what we can do, how to mobilize. We'll be handing out information and educating everybody, hopefully getting people to register vote, or if they already are registered, make them realize you've got to go.
Right. Right. And don't think that just because, it's going to pass. No, get out and vote. It's so necessary. Adam Smith, the executive director of Marijuana Policy Project at that Framingham event, gave me a great soundbite. He goes, not only do we have to defeat it, we have to crush it. Otherwise, they're going to get empowered and bring this ballot undo initiative to other states. And that is a scary thought. And that's why they're putting so much money, and I'm talking about the prohibitionists, into this campaign. And I'm hoping that the people of Massachusetts step up and understand that too. And I'll be doing Men on the Street interviews with people at the IRVA booth, inside their booth. So I'll have plenty of content, as it were.
And finally tonight, for many years in the emerging legal cannabis market, flower has been the biggest seller. That includes ounces, eighths, quarter, and half ounces of buds. Part of this factor has to do with many consumers who enjoy the experience of rolling their own joints and blunts. And no matter how you consume, all of us know rolling a perfect joint is still a challenge. Market analysis of 2025 shows that trend is changing, though. Now the flower category has been replaced by the pre-roll. Custom Cones just published their State of the Pre-Roll Market report for 2026, and some of the results are eye-opening. According to Headset, a leading data analytics company, this category generated more than 383 million pre-rolled joints with a 15.9% market share, the largest growth of any category in cannabis. The raw flower category only grew 1.5% in 2025, while the pre-roll category grew 9.8% year over year. Well, that will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. We hope you are having a safe and responsible 420 celebration. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
So what's your life story? Do you define yourself by your career or by your personal journey? The trick is to tell it in under 15 seconds. Here's mine. I'm Jimmy Young, a 30-year Emmy Award-winning sportscaster from New England who's a teacher and coach in my soul. I've mentored hundreds of young people, but I'm most proud of my only child, a 35-year-old son, Gabriel, who's now a licensed electrician in North Carolina who can fix anything. How about you? If you want to build your confidence enough to walk up to a stranger at a networking event and start a conversation, sign up for my office hours with Professor Jimmy live on Monday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Now, there's a fee of $1 to hang out with me for that hour, but I'll share some tips so you can tell your life story in 15 seconds. Just log on to ProfessorJimmy.com, and guess what? I'll even give you your $1 back if you don't laugh and learn something that can help you become a better communicator. Thank you.